Thursday, no, actually it was Friday. I met with somebody at a golf course. I don't golf, but we met in the clubhouse and things. And after the meeting, I went out to my car, and I tried to put the key in the car, and it wouldn't go in. And so I don't usually use the knobs and things on the car thing, but I couldn't get the key in, so I used that, and it opened up. And so I took it to the dealer, and they tried to put the key in. They said, it looks like somebody tried to break into your car. Yeah. And they left something in there. And if they leave it in there, if you leave it in there, I mean, you can use the keypad to get in, and the key still works to start. So functionally, you can make it. But that piece that's left in the car lock, for some reason that they couldn't really explain to me, drains the battery. And so if it's left in there, eventually my battery is going to go out. Well, eventually my battery is going to go out anyway, but this will just accelerate the process, right? So I had it fixed and things. But as I was having it fixed, first they have to replace the whole lock and things, and so it got to be pretty expensive in my view. And so this anger started to flow up, and at first it was directed to the individuals, and then I was thinking, well, what did I do? I didn't park I parked in a really open space, and there was a street right next going there, and so I thought, why did this happen? And so my anger started to turn toward God and say, God, I was doing something that I think you've called me to do in ministry, to meet with people, and then instead I get an added nuisance happen and things. And so all of that reminded me that when I speak, God often brings me experiences that relate to what I'm talking about. And what we're going to talk about today are 3 lenses of trust. And in my little experience there, all 3 lenses I had to look at, okay? So let me basically say that the theme of this is, what does trust look like? Does trust mean that whenever bad things happen, you say, oh, I'll just trust God, or it's okay, I can handle it? Or is there something more to that? And then the other thing is about trust is, I believe it happens in 3 areas. And so we're going to look at what I call the 3 lenses of trust. And the first lens that we'll look at is the trust of ourselves. And I think that trust is actually where trust begins, is we need to be able to trust ourselves first. But in order to trust ourselves, the second lens has to happen, and that's the lens of our relationship with God. Because separate and apart from a relationship with God, we will not be able to trust ourselves in a healthy way. That it is only with a relationship with God that we can truly become fully, I'll use the term human, okay? Because without God and without His truth, we will be left in a state of confusion and frustration. And the last lens is others, because if we really believe we trust God and we're trusting ourselves, that should be demonstrated in our relationship with others. And if that's not happening, then maybe we need to go back to the first 2 and say, am I trusting God? Am I trusting myself? And where's the breakdown there? Okay? Instead of the opposite happens in my example, right? I was first mad at the guy who did this to me. I don't know if it's a guy, the person, okay? The person who did this to me. And instead of looking at, well, what's stirring up inside of me and what's causing this. So let me give you some statements here. The first statement is that trust is based in truth. That you cannot have trust without truth. You cannot create a scenario and make that person or have a relationship that is trustworthy if it's not based in truth. Because fairy tales are fairy tales. They don't exist. They sound nice. They give you good feelings and things, but they are not based in reality. And that's what truth is. Truth is being able to see things in reality. Second is, I believe trust rather, starts with you. The first relationship I believe that you have to establish is to be able to trust yourself, which means that you cannot create fairy tales about yourself, or you can't take on fables that people have given you, or you can't take on the things that maybe you would want to be and put them and believe that they are. So it starts with you, and then, but it doesn't start. It doesn't stop there. And the third thing is God invites you to trust. From the very beginning, God created a trust relationship with Adam and Eve. And as the little video stated, trust was broken. But the way that God invited Adam and Eve to trust him was an invitation. It wasn't done with fear. It wasn't done with power. People think, well, what if he said, but in that day you will die? Isn't that a threat? And I would read that as a consequence of your action. If you do this, this is the consequence. But I'm going to trust you enough to believe that you will not choose that you would choose something other than that consequence. So it was not predestined, I believe, that Adam and Eve would eat the fruit or partake the fruit. It was their choice. And it was not that God wanted that choice. Maybe something to think about is, does God get everything he wants? No. Because it says in Scripture, God desires everyone to be saved. Is everyone going to be saved? No. God desires a relationship with everyone. Does everyone have a relationship with him? No. So God does not get everything he desires, but he gets everything he wills, because what he wills is only good things. And so it will not be where there will come a time where his will be perfectly shown. But I believe, even in heaven, that we're going to see where God was saddened by people's choices. And he's not happy that they made those choices. So, that's just an opinion by an old man. Okay? So, let's look at self, the relationship with self, the self lens. And I'm going to read a scripture here from Romans chapter 12. And it says this. Oh, thanks. I didn't know if I could put it over there. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah. And I would have gotten a haircut too, Daniel, but I do self-haircuts, and so I wouldn't have that good look. So Romans 12 says this, "For by grace you given to me, I say to you, everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned." So the point of Paul's statement here, or one of the points, is the message of grace is meant to allow us to enter into a truth about ourselves. The truth that we aren't everything that maybe we think we ought to be, or we think maybe we could be, but we are not in a place where we're a loser, that we will never measure up to something, because the measure is just being who you are and stepping into who God made you to be. That's the sober judgment. To be able to, if you think about it in terms of being inebriated or under the influence, when someone is inebriated, one of the functions that they lose is being able to walk straight, or to be able to make good judgments. So what it means is that we will be able to walk straight and make good judgments. But a second part of this is also in Romans, in a previous chapter 7. And it says this. Well, it's actually the struggle is what I call this. And so in chapter 7, it reads this way. "For I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Now, if I do what I do not want, I agree with the law that it is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but the sin that dwells within me." There's an important distinction here, right? People debate this passage about, well, was Paul talking about before he knew Jesus or after he knew Jesus? I think he's talking about both, frankly, because I know Jesus, but I struggle with this, that the good I want to do, I don't do, and the very evil that I don't want to do, I wind up doing. And the message of this is that's the struggle we have to be able to trust ourselves. And that's why I said, without God, you will never find out who you really are. I never really live into it, because you will have this struggle with no answer. And it will create frustration. The world will tell you, just try harder. And the passage says, it's not in you to do that. You don't have the power. It is only with God that we are free. And that if I read further, that is what we would see. But let me go on to another apostle, John, and his statement about this. And he says this, "By this we shall know that we are of the truth, and we are sure our heart before him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart. He knows everything. Beloved, if your heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God, and whatever we ask, we receive from him because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. So that's from 1 John 3:22, and it's the confidence that God can give us. That when we feel our lens of ourselves is clouded with all kinds of cracks, and that's all we see are the cracks, that God will allow us to be able to know that he can take those cracks and mend them. And that the lens will be restored, and we can have confidence that God is greater than a cracked lens. And that is where what that first passage said about sin that dwells in our flesh is conquered. Because if we read on in Romans 7, he talks about, but thanks be to Jesus who frees me. Okay? So, separate and apart from being able to know that God is for us, we cannot really know who we really are. Because it will be clouded with all kinds of things that will make these cracks in how we see ourselves more visible. When you wear glasses, or at least for me, when I wear glasses, if I have just a little crack, it doesn't matter that I can see all these other things. I see the crack, and that is where I focus on. And that is what happens in your life if you do not let God and restore or know that he's restoring that lens, that he's repairing it better than Safe Light on Windows, right? That he will restore and give us new lenses, okay? So we can have confidence is the point. But part of the confidence, I think, our big part of the confidence, is knowing how God sees us. How does God see us? And that's the God lens. And in Romans 8, we read this. So then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God, or children of God. Okay? For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may be also glorified with him. God sees you as his child. And so nothing that you do is going to change that. You stay his child. Adoption is the way it's described. And from what I understand of adoption, it's a long process, right? But it is also a process that's legally binding. And so in any court of law or anything, that person is now the child of the person who adopted them. They have all the rights and things. And it's interesting that Paul here also talks about suffer with him. When Linda and Tim were sharing about grief and things, and how grief encourages trust. Okay, I believe that in the things we suffer is part of the lesson there is that God doesn't desert us in the midst of the suffering, that God stays with us. And he will be there, just like an adopted parent doesn't disappear when things go wrong. A good adopted parent, at least. So there is an element here also that of a future, because he talks about being heirs. And you only really realize the riches of being an heir when the person leaves, when the person dies. Okay? And I believe the analogy here is this. The more we understand what the death of Jesus was about, the more we're going to know what the riches that opened up for us and that we have. And so that's why one of the symbols of Christianity has been a cross, which represents death, right? And it's in that death that we actually receive more of the understanding, the capacity to trust, because we see that God is in the midst of even the thing. To me, the cross represents a day when everything went bad, more than trying to get your car broken into, right? It represented the day when the whole world was against Jesus. But what it also represented was Jesus could be there and not take vengeance, to take it with patience in knowing that he didn't have to fight the circumstances. He just had to move through them. And once he moved through them, the victory happened. The resurrection happened. Okay? So, the God lens is basically saying, God is for you. There's not anything that you can do. There's not anything that anyone can say to change that. That God is for you. And if you hear other people tell you that somehow God is mad at you, or if you hear things like, well, you got to pay for what you did, I would take it up with God and say, Father, is that what you really say about me? And another place you can take it up is with other people, okay? And that's the other lens, okay? Because I believe if we really understand the love that God has for us, we're going to really be able to love ourselves. Because we're going to see ourselves in truth, which means that we're going to see the faults we have, the broken lens places, and not be so focused on that, but be able to know that there's something greater than all of that, who is God, who is for us, who will never leave us. We're in this process, and nothing's going to change that process. But the other lens is, how is that process working out? And it can show us where maybe we're focusing in on things that are not really, truly of God. And so, in going back to Romans 12, it says this. Paul says this. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. All of those things sound really good, right? And if you just take that verse or that passage out in context, and you just heard someone like me say, okay, this is what God wants you to have in your life, I believe that there will be a temptation for you to try harder to be these things. But in the context of where Paul put this, it was an outcome of Paul being able to receive the struggle passage that's in chapter 7. This isn't chapter 12. To have sober judgment, that's at the beginning of this chapter, before he gets into this. God does not have an expectation of behavior in the sense that that is the emphasis of your life, is how well you're behaving. But he invites us to be able to look at how we're behaving, to see if what we internally think where we are is true. And that goes back to trust being based in truth. If we are not willing to look at where we are maybe falling short of God's promises, maybe not really believing who God says we are, and instead trying to defend ourselves, or there's all kinds of things that strategies that we have. My favorite strategy is to hide. So when I start hiding, I know this is not good. And I can make it sound really religious, right? I can make it sound like, I'm just spending quiet time with God and going off and being by myself and things. What I'm really doing is avoiding the conflict, right? Fortunately, when I do that, I've learned that if I stay in that quiet place and stuff, God will bring it up. And he will say, Stan, there's something that I know that's really bothering you. Or maybe it's not bothering you, but it's there. It's like that piece of metal in the lock. It's draining your battery. And it's this. Okay? Usually it has to do with relationships. And that's where this comes in, right? And I can think about, is my love really genuine with this person? Am I truly being honest? Or do I just say nice things? Or do I abhor what is evil and hold fast to what is good? Do I keep looking at the places where they're messing up rather than looking at the places where they're trying and they're looking to improve? Or do I love with brotherly affection, which means that it's not just a task that I'm about, but it's truly sharing something that's in my heart, that I really want them to be better. I really want to give them something good. And outdo one another in showing honor, right? Do I respect them? Do I show respect to them? And maybe showing respect means when they're talking to me, do I really listen to them? They don't know, right? Because I could put on a face of really being attentive, looking attentive. But in my mind, I'm thinking, when is this going to end, right? How do I somehow change the direction of this? When I was in business, we would have this thing about when you're in an interview and a guy is talking and stuff, you want to take control of the interview. So there are certain things that you start to interject, and you figure out ways. So you really don't care what he's saying or she's saying, but you're looking for ways to get back on your agenda and what you're there for, right? And that is, to me, not really showing honor. It's disrespectful. Do not be slothful in zeal. I think sometimes, for me, this shows up in I can say I'm happy for the person, but I don't really feel the happiness. I don't allow myself to feel the happiness because my mind gets taken off on, in my car example, I don't have time to do this kind of stuff, to spend 4 hours in a place to wait for a part to do this, right? So to really be happy for people, to not be slothful, to be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord, okay? Good things. fervent in spirit, do things with enthusiasm, not fake enthusiasm, but real enthusiasm. And if those things aren't happening, then the invitation is not to try to make them, conjure them up. The invitation is to find out, well, what's keeping me from this? And to deal with that. Again, going back, the trust begins with you. That where are you really be able to trust to be who God made you to be? Or are you trusting something else? So, and the last thing I wanted to say was to be able to rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. I think if I really care about somebody, I'm going to pray for them. And that doesn't mean that, you spend what my wife calls my prayers as more sermons than prayers. That doesn't mean you pray sermons over the person, but you really bring them into your thoughts and lift them up to Jesus and say, Jesus, bless them. Or Jesus, give them what they need. Or Jesus, let them know that my thoughts are with your thoughts about them. And doing that. So, what I thought we could do is spend a little time in reflection. And I have 3 questions that you can think about, but you don't have to think about those. If there's something in your life or someplace in your life where you got something stuck, like that piece of metal that's draining you, I would invite you, if you don't know what it is, because I never really saw what was in the lock, but I don't know if that's as important as maybe the first step, acknowledging that it's there, and then asking God to help you through that. Because the idea is not that we find something and find a solution to it all at once. The invitation is that whatever God wants us to do with what he's showing us, we step into that and take that step. Because that's where trust is developed. Like Lori said, trust doesn't just happen. We can't just say, trust me. It's developed by repetition, by those 5 characteristics being repeated over and over again. And those are hardest in small steps. Because once you take the small step, it's like you look back and say, that wasn't that much. There wasn't that much that changed. But what changed was you were once there and now you're here. And so there's a new step now. So the first one is, who is the person I trust? So what I'm basically asking you to think about is, when you think of a trustworthy person, what kind of person do you visualize? And I would invite you to be able to think about maybe a trustworthy person includes someone who will be able to say things that are not right, but not in a way of condemnation. A truly trustworthy person, I believe, will be able to tell you that you're wrong and you're doing things that aren't healthy, but not in a way to make you feel like you're such a fool to make those choices and do those things. And what I would invite you to do is say, maybe as a corollary to this question is, are you a trustworthy person? If you were to come to you yourself, would you want to hear what you had to say? Would you want to be able to interact with yourself in that kind of healthy way? Because sometimes the way we act, or at least for me, the way I interact with myself, I'll come to myself and it's, well, I was going to say I was going to blame my mom, but God has convicted me not to blame my mom. So, but it's a voice that says, you could have done better here. You should have done better here. You're my son. What's wrong with you? And that is a voice that is not trustworthy. That's not a person you want to show I believe that you can trust. Because what happens is you will never really feel comfortable dealing with things. Because you always feel like, well, if I bring something up, it's going to be just real conflict. And I'm going to enter into that struggle that Paul talked about, that the good I want to do, I don't do, and the bad that I don't want to do, I wind up doing, right? The second question is, what is ideal trust for you? And like I said, the first step is trust is related to truth. So do you really love truth? Or would you rather not hear some truth? And if it's the latter, that's okay as long as you admit it. Because that's the truth. To say that you really love truth and then not really want to hear the bad stuff is a falsehood. It's a lie. Because you only want to hear the good stuff. You don't want to hear the bad stuff. And truth includes both. Because that's reality. And the last question has to do with who I am authentically. And by authentically, I mean God made you who you are. And He is not ashamed of who you are. He would stand up and say, this person belongs to me. And then I believe He would put His arms around you and shout to the world, this is the person that I love. So we'll spend about 2 minutes, and then I'll just close in a word of prayer, and then we'll enter into worship with song, okay? So why don't we spend some time around this, or if there's something else that God has put in your sense, we can do that, okay? So we'll just have a time of quiet, and then I'll just pray, and the worship team come up and